7 hours ago, the National Interagency Fire Center published its daily National Fire Situation Report. I want to read the specific numbers to you because the accumulation of them tells you something that no single piece of it conveys alone. Firefighters are working to suppress and contain 84 large fires across the country, including 3 new large incidents since yesterday. A total of 26,808 firefighters and support personnel are engaged in nationwide fire activity. 601 crews, 118 engines, and 203 helicopters. So far this year, 44,256 fires have burned more than 9 million acres across the United States, exceeding the 10-year average for both the number of fires and the acres burned. Fire activity continues to be elevated in the Northwest geographic area, which remains at Preparedness Level 5, 26,800 firefighters across 84 fires simultaneously in the first week of August. Preparedness Level 5 is the maximum designation on the National Interagency Fire Center's 5-level scale. It exists as a concept specifically to describe the situation the country is in right now. National wildland firefighting resources are fully committed. There is no national reserve. The Type 1 incident management teams, the most experienced, best-equipped command structures that can be deployed to the largest fires, are all assigned. The Type 2 teams are all assigned. The crews that would normally be on standby to respond to the next emergency are not on standby. They are already on a fire. And yesterday alone, 117 new fires were reported across the country. 117 ignitions in a single day. Most of them will be contained quickly. But the 3 that were not, the 3 new large incidents the NIFC counted since yesterday, are the ones that will be making headlines next week. I want to explain what Preparedness Level 5 means for those 3 new large incidents, and for every new ignition that sparks in the western United States today, because the resource situation changes the outcome of every wildfire in a way that most people never think about. A wildfire that ignites in March, in a normal fire year with national resources at Preparedness Level 1 or 2, is likely to be met within the first hour, or 2 by initial attack resources, a helicopter drop, a hand crew, an engine strike team. Initial attack in the first few hours is the most critical phase of wildfire suppression. Studies of fire behavior show that fires caught in the first operational period, the first 24 hours, are successfully contained about 95 to 97% of the time. Fires that escape initial attack and burn into a second operational period become the 5% of fires that account for approximately 95% of the total acreage burned in any given season. The mathematics of fire suppression are extraordinarily nonlinear. The vast majority of fires are small, and a tiny fraction become the catastrophes. At Preparedness Level 5, initial attack resources are stretched to their absolute limit. The crew that would have been dispatched to a new ignition in the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest in eastern Washington within 45 minutes of detection is already on assignment at the Little Giant Fire in the Chihuahua River drainage. The helicopter that would have made the critical first drop on a spark from a lightning storm in Wheeler County, Oregon, is already committed to the Roe Creek complex. When initial attack resources are not available, or arrive too late because they are coming from further away than normal, fires that would have been contained at 10 acres become 100 acres, and fires that would have been contained at 100 acres become the next major incident on the NIFC's daily report. 3 new large incidents yesterday. More today. The deficit compounds. The NIFC's report specifically called out the inland, northwest, and northern Rockies as the zones under critical to extreme fire weather today. Strong winds. Very low humidity. Hot temperatures. This geographic specificity matters because the inland northwest, eastern Washington, northern Idaho, western Montana, is one of the most fire-prone landscapes in North America and one of the most understudied by people who follow California fire coverage. Eastern Washington's channeled scablands and pine forest transition zones, the river corridors of the Clearwater and Salmon River drainages in Idaho, the ponderosa pine and Douglas fir forests of western Montana. These are landscapes that burned in large, stand-replacing fires for millennia before European settlement, and that accumulated enormous fuel loads during the era of fire suppression that began after the catastrophic events of 1910, August 20th and 21, 1910. I want to anchor this script in those 2 days specifically because what happened then is the specific historical event that makes the current inland northwest fire situation legible in its full context. The summer of 1910 had been dry across the entire inland northwest. Fires had been burning across Idaho, Montana, and eastern Washington through the summer, a mirror of what is happening right now. The fledgling U.S. Forest Service, it had only been created in 1905, 5 years earlier, had put its newly trained rangers and thousands of firefighters onto the blazes. By August, the fire situation was bad but not uncontrollable. And then, on the afternoon of August 20th, 1910, A wind event arrived across the inland Northwest, unlike anything the firefighters on the lines had experienced or could have anticipated. A mass of dry continental air pushed through the region, with gusts reaching 70 to 80 miles per hour in some areas. The fires that had been burning for weeks exploded. Individual fires merged into each other, creating fire weather conditions so intense that the fires were generating their own winds and their own lightning. In a period of approximately 2 days, roughly 3 million acres burned across Idaho and Montana, an area larger than the state of Connecticut, consumed in 48 hours. 85 firefighters were killed. Many of them died because the fire's behavior was so beyond anything they could outrun or shelter from that their positions simply burned over. The fires were eventually controlled not by firefighting but by rain. The big blowup of 1910, as it became known, had two lasting consequences. The first was the deaths. The second was the doctrine. The Forest Service leadership at the time, including the chief of the agency, Gifford Pinchot's successor, Henry, Graves, and others who came after, concluded from 1910 that the answer to wildfire catastrophe was aggressive suppression. Get every fire out before it could grow. The 10 a.m. policy, formalized in the 1930s, stated that every new fire should be suppressed by 10 in the morning the following day. For the next 80 years, the U.S. federal land management agencies pursued this doctrine with increasing sophistication, growing aerial firefighting capabilities, better communications, and expanding firefighting workforces. And for 80 years, the fuels in western forests accumulated. Every fire that did not burn left behind the trees and brush that would have been consumed. 80 years of unburned biomass in landscapes that evolved with fire means today's fires have the fuel load to produce behavior that the big blowup would recognize. The Roe Creek Complex in Oregon, the Little Giant Fire in Washington, the Babylon Fire in Utah, sitting at 0% containment at over 53,000 acres, the Aspen Acres Fire in Colorado that I covered in July. These fires are burning through landscapes where the fuel load is 2 to 3 times what it would have been before European settlement, in forests where the natural disturbance regime of frequent low-intensity fire was interrupted for a century. When those fuels ignite under the conditions the inland Northwest is experiencing today, critical fire weather, strong winds, single-digit relative humidity in the afternoon hours, the fires do not burn like historically normal wildfires. They burn like the big blowup did. Now I want to spend time on something that is the most widespread immediate consequence of 84 large fires burning simultaneously and that receives the least proportionate coverage: the smoke. And specifically, what the smoke is doing to the health of every person in the western United States right now, not just the people in the direct path of evacuation orders. Wildfire smoke is not the same as ordinary air pollution. When wood burns at the temperatures a wildfire produces, it releases a complex mixture of particulate matter, gases, and chemical compounds that differ significantly from the emissions of vehicles or industrial sources. The component that drives the most measurable health impact is fine particulate matter, particles 2, 5 micrometers in diameter or smaller, what the EPA calls PM2. 5. These particles are so small that they penetrate deep into the lungs, reaching the alveoli where gas exchange occurs, and can enter the bloodstream. Once in the blood, they drive systemic inflammation responses that affect not just the lungs, but the cardiovascular system, the brain, and in vulnerable populations can accelerate or trigger acute cardiac and pulmonary events. The AQI, Air Quality Index, is the tool most people see when they check an air quality app, and it is worth understanding what the categories mean in terms of PM2. 5 concentrations. When the AQI is below 50, considered good, PM2. 5 concentrations are below 12 micrograms per cubic meter of air, essentially background levels. When the AQI enters the unhealthy range above 150 PM2, 5 is above 55 micrograms per cubic meter. At very unhealthy levels, above 200 AQI, PM2. 5 exceeds 150 micrograms. During the worst smoke events near major wildfires, AQI values above 400 with PM2. 5 concentrations above 250 micrograms have been recorded in communities that were not in any evacuation zone but were simply downwind of a major fire. Across the inland Northwest right now, communities in eastern Washington, northern Idaho, and western Montana are experiencing smoke-impacted air quality that ranges from unhealthy for sensitive groups to outright unhealthy on days when the wind is from the wrong direction. The populations most affected by wildfire smoke at these concentrations are the same populations most vulnerable to heat: people with cardiovascular disease, people with asthma or COPD, elderly residents, children, and people who work outdoors. Firefighters themselves face an extraordinary occupational smoke exposure. The firefighters on the fire line in the inland Northwest today are breathing air with PM2. 5 concentrations orders of magnitude above what OSHA considers safe for continuous occupational exposure. Wildfire smoke health research consistently finds elevated risk of cardiac events, respiratory hospitalizations, and preterm birth outcomes in populations exposed to days or weeks of elevated PM2. 5. The specific practical guidance for people in smoke-affected areas, and with 84 large fires burning across the West that describes tens of millions of people, is specific and actionable. N95 respirators, not surgical masks, provide meaningful protection against PM2. 5, when worn correctly and fit tested. The particles are small enough to pass through the loose seal of a surgical mask. Indoor air quality matters. Keep windows and doors closed during smoke events. Run any air conditioning in recirculation mode rather than fresh air intake. And if you have a portable air purifier with a HEPA filter, keep it running in the rooms where you spend the most time. The specific populations I named, those with asthma, heart disease, COPD, and the elderly, should follow specific guidance from their physicians about whether to preemptively use rescue inhalers, limit outdoor activity, or consider temporary relocation during the worst smoke days. For firefighters, and anyone doing outdoor work in the smoke zone, the heat and the smoke are a compound hazard that requires both sun and smoke protection simultaneously. Hydration needs are elevated by heat, and the smoke impairs respiratory efficiency at the same time. Work-rest cycles for outdoor workers during elevated smoke days should be shorter than in clear air conditions. The specific failure mode is respiratory impairment from smoke reducing oxygen exchange, efficiency at the same time that heat is increasing physiological oxygen demand, a combination that can progress from normal function to acute distress more rapidly than either factor alone. The August 2026 fire season is tracking to exceed any comparable period in the modern historical record. The NIFC's own words, fire activity is mirroring conditions normally not seen until much later in the season. The 4. 9 million acres burned already, with the 2 most intense months of fire weather still ahead. The National Resource System at its maximum commitment level. 3 new large incidents yesterday, with more expected today as the critical fire weather conditions the forecast identifies for the inland, northwest, and northern Rockies produce new ignitions on a landscape with no reserve suppression capacity available to catch them in the initial attack window that determines their eventual size. The August pattern I described in the August forecast video brought the expected El Niño-driven dual reality. Enhanced monsoon rainfall in the southwest, reducing fire risk there, while the northwest and northern Rockies that do not benefit from monsoon moisture continue in the drought and heat conditions that have been driving this fire season since March. The monsoon that is beginning to provide some relief to Arizona and New Mexico is simultaneously producing the dry, unstable air that the inland northwest receives on its backside. Clear, hot, low humidity air that is exactly the driver of today's critical fire weather. What this season requires at the individual and community level depends on where you are. If you are in an evacuation zone anywhere in the inland northwest, Utah, Colorado, or the northern Rockies, go. Do not wait for a mandatory order if a voluntary evacuation is in place. The suppression resources that would slow a fire approaching your community are at their minimum availability. The initial attack that might have stopped the fire 3 ridges away from your house could not happen because the available resources were committed elsewhere. Leave when the opportunity is calm, not when the fire is visible. If you are in a community not in the direct fire zone but in smoke-affected areas, treat smoke days as seriously as extreme heat days, because the physiological impact on vulnerable populations is comparable. Check the AQI for your specific location, not just your county. Find an air purifier or access an air-conditioned public building on the highest AQI days. This is not inconvenience management. It is health protection for populations that smoke specifically targets. And if you are anywhere in the western United States in a wildland-urban interface community that has not been directly threatened yet this season, the NIFC Preparedness Level 5 status means that if a fire ignites near your community, it may receive delayed initial attack response. The defensible space and home hardening work that changes the survivability of a structure in a wildfire needs to be done before the fire arrives. If you have been putting it off, this is the week. The season is not over. It has just reached the resource saturation point at which every new ignition operates in a lower response environment than it would have faced in June. 84 fires burning. 26,808 people fighting them. 4.9 million acres already consumed. And today's critical fire weather forecast for the inland northwest. I will be tracking this through August. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.